The deed landed on the table like a sentence. Wade's uncle slid it across the mahogany surface, and the room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds before Cayden started laughing. Not a kind laugh. The kind that fills a room and makes everyone else feel like they're in on something. "You're kidding," Cayden said, shaking his head. "That's what you got?" Wade looked at the paper. 40 acres, rocky, steep grade running north to south. No water source marked on the survey. Isolated from town by about 6 miles of county road that probably hadn't been maintained in years. Jessica leaned over her husband's shoulder, squinting at the property map like it might change if she looked hard enough. "There's literally nothing out there," she said. "I drove past it once. It's just rocks and dirt." The rest of the family nodded. Not cruel nods. Worse than that. Pity nods. The kind that said, "We're sorry for you, but we're also relieved it wasn't us."
Wade's mother reached over and squeezed his hand. "You could sell it," she offered quietly. "Someone might want the land, even if it's not."
"I'm not selling it," Wade said. Cayden laughed again, louder this time. "Why would you keep it? It's worthless. Uncle Tom left it to you because nobody else wanted it. That's not an inheritance, that's a punishment." Wade folded the deed and put it in his jacket pocket. He didn't argue. Arguing would only make it worse, would only prove that their words had landed. So he just nodded and changed the subject, and by the time dessert came around, everyone had moved on to easier topics. But Wade hadn't moved on. He thought about that land all the way home. Thought about it when he woke up the next morning. Thought about it enough that by the end of the week, he'd driven out to see it. The property was worse than he'd imagined. The access road was barely a road, more like a suggestion of one, rutted and overgrown, lined with dead brush that scraped the undercarriage of his truck. When he finally reached the top of the hill, Wade killed the engine and just sat there, staring at what his family had dismissed so easily. 40 acres of nothing. The ground was rocky, the kind of rocky that meant nothing would grow there without serious work. The soil looked thin, almost gray, like all the nutrients had been leached out decades ago. There were no trees to speak of, just scattered brush and weeds that had adapted to living on almost nothing. The hill itself was steep enough that water would run right off it during rain, carrying whatever topsoil remained down into the valley below. A realtor had driven out here once, back when Uncle Tom still owned it. Wade found the listing online. It had lasted 4 days before being pulled. The description was honest, at least. Undeveloped acreage, challenging topography, no utilities, suitable for investment or future development. The realtor's final note, not recommended for residential or commercial use. Wade walked the property line, his boots crunching on loose stone. The nearest neighbor was almost 2 miles away. The county assessor's office had valued it at just under $12,000, not per acre, total, for all 40 acres. When he'd asked the county assessor about water access, the man had shrugged like Wade had asked him to predict the weather. "There's a county well about 3 miles south," the assessor had said. "Beyond that, you'd have to drill. Could be expensive. Could be nothing down there at all." Wade stood at the highest point of the property and looked out across the valley. The sun was setting, turning everything orange and red. And somewhere beneath his feet, beneath all that rock and dead soil, there had to be something. Had to be. Because otherwise, why would his family have fought so hard not to inherit it?
Why would they laugh so hard when someone else had to?
He decided right then he would dig a well. The well drilling took 3 weeks to arrange. Wade hired a local contractor named Frank, who'd drilled wells in the county for 30 years. Frank showed up on a Monday morning with his rig, a massive machine that looked like it belonged on another planet, and started boring down into the earth. By Wednesday afternoon, Frank's drill hit something that wasn't supposed to be there. Wade was sitting in his truck, watching the rig work, when Frank killed the engine and climbed down. His face had changed, not worried exactly. More like confused. "There's stone down there," Frank said. "Not bedrock, cut stone. like someone deliberately placed it. Wade felt something shift in his chest. "How deep?" he asked. 30 feet, and it's not natural, it's arranged, stacked almost, like a wall. They brought the rig back in and dug around the stone instead of through it.
What they found was a chamber. A deliberate, constructed chamber, sealed with packed earth and covered with carefully cut limestone blocks. Someone had gone to serious effort to hide whatever was underneath. Frank whistled low when he realized the scope of it.
"This is old," he said. "Real old. You know what this is?" Wade didn't, but he called a surveyor. The surveyor's name was Michael Chen, and he arrived the next morning with equipment that looked like it belonged in a laboratory. He took samples of the stone, tested the soil composition, ran his instruments over the sealed chamber like he was reading a map written in a language only he understood. When he stood up, his hands were shaking slightly.
"There's water down there," Michael said. "A lot of it. And the mineral content." He looked at his readings again, like they might have changed. "This isn't normal groundwater. The composition is unusual. Rare, actually. I've never seen anything quite like it." "Rare how?" Wade asked. "Rare like someone would have sealed it deliberately if they wanted to hide it. Rare like it has industrial value." Wade thought about his family laughing, thought about the realtor's note, thought about his uncle leaving him the worthless land because nobody else wanted it. Someone had sealed a mineral spring beneath 40 acres of rocky hillside. Someone had buried it deliberately, covered it with stone, and packed earth on top like they were trying to erase it from history. And then they'd let the land sit empty for decades, worthless and unwanted, while the secret stayed buried underneath. Michael made a call to the State Geological Survey. By Friday, there was a geologist on the property. By the following Monday, there was a historian. Her name was Dr. Ricardo White, and she arrived carrying old maps and a look of absolute intensity.
"I think I know what you found," she said, before Wade had even finished explaining. "And if I'm right, this isn't just a spring." She unrolled a map from 1887. "This land," Dr. White said, pointing to a marked area, "was part of a mining settlement, a thriving one, and according to these records, it was deliberately dismantled." Wade stared at the map, at the buildings marked in careful ink, at the notation beside the spring, sealed, 1889. The worthless land suddenly wasn't worthless anymore. It was buried. Dr. White brought a team with her on the next visit. They came with careful tools, brushes, chisels, documentation cameras, the kind of equipment you use when you're trying to preserve something that's been hidden for over a century. Wade watched as they cleared away the packed earth, exposing the stone chamber inch by inch. The vault door was iron, heavy, sealed with rust and time, but still intact. It took 2 days to carefully extract it without damaging what was inside. When they finally got it open, the sound it made was like a long breath being released. Metal on metal, grinding against itself after more than 100 years of silence. Wade's hands were shaking when he stepped forward to look inside. The smell hit first. Old earth, metal, something like leather left in darkness. The photographs came next. Black and white images, some faded almost to nothing, showing families standing in front of wooden buildings. Men with pickaxes, equipment he didn't recognize. A small town that no longer existed, preserved in silver and shadow. He pulled out a leather-bound journal. The pages were brittle, the handwriting careful and deliberate. Names, dates, records of ore shipments, contracts, property deeds marked with signatures from men who'd been dead for over a century. There were maps. Hand-drawn surveys showing mining claims, marked with measurements and notations in faded ink. There were letters, dozens of them, correspondence between property owners, disputes over claims, arguments about water rights and mineral extraction. And beneath it all, photographs of the spring itself. The water flowing clear and bright, channeled into collection pools, being tested and measured and documented with the precision of men who understood they'd found something valuable. Wade sat back on his heels, holding a journal from 1888, and understood. This wasn't a failed settlement.
This was a thriving mining operation. The settlement had been deliberately dismantled. The spring had been deliberately sealed. Someone had gone to extraordinary effort to bury the evidence of what had existed here. Dr. White was photographing each document, her hands moving with careful precision. When she looked up at Wade, her eyes were bright. "This is significant," she said quietly. "Do you understand what this means? There was a mining operation here, a successful one, and someone sealed it deliberately. Someone wanted this to disappear." Wade thought about his family, about the land they'd dismissed as worthless, about how easy it had been to laugh at him for inheriting something they didn't want. They hadn't known. None of them had known. But someone had known. Someone had sealed this vault and buried this spring and left the land to sit empty and unwanted, its secret locked beneath 40 acres of rock and dirt. The question wasn't why Wade's family had rejected the land. The question was why someone had worked so hard to make sure nobody would ever want it. The geologist arrived on a Tuesday morning with equipment that looked like it belonged in a laboratory. His name was Dr. Marcus Reeves, and he spent the first hour just taking samples. Soil samples, water samples, rock samples. He tested the mineral composition with instruments Wade didn't understand, wrote numbers in a notebook, and kept his expression carefully neutral. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and precise. "The mineral content is remarkable," Dr. Reeves said, showing Wade the preliminary readings. "This spring contains lithium salts, potassium compounds, and trace minerals that have industrial applications. The concentration is unusually high. If this were properly managed, it could generate consistent revenue through mineral extraction licenses." Wade felt the ground shift beneath him again. "How much revenue?" he asked. Dr. Reeves looked at his notes. "That depends on extraction rates and market conditions, but conservatively, this could be worth several $100,000 over a decade, possibly more." The County Historical Society got involved next. They wanted to document everything: the vault, the journals, the photographs, the maps. They brought archivists and researchers, people who understood how to preserve things that had been buried and forgotten. Dr. Ricardo White coordinated with them, cross-referencing the documents against county records, building a timeline of what had happened in the 1880s. The story emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical solution. The settlement had been called Prospect Ridge. It was established in 1883 by a consortium of miners who discovered the mineral spring and recognized its value. For 6 years, the operation thrived. They extracted minerals, shipped them to processing facilities, built a small town around the operation. Families moved in, businesses opened, schools were established. Then, in 1889, everything stopped. The documents in the vault told the story: a legal dispute, a competing claim filed by another family who argued they owned the mineral rights. Years of litigation, letters growing increasingly hostile, and then a settlement. A legal agreement that essentially gave one family control of the property on the condition that the mining operation cease immediately and the spring be sealed. Someone had won the legal battle, and as part of their victory, they demanded the spring be buried. The evidence of its value had to be erased. The settlement had to be abandoned. The land had to become worthless. It was a punishment disguised as a settlement, a way of saying, if I can't have it, nobody can. And it had worked. For over 100 years it had worked. The news spread through the family like wildfire. Wade's phone started ringing on a Thursday afternoon. First his mother, asking if the stories were true. Then his aunt, wanting to know about the mineral rights. Then Cayden, his voice different now, careful, measured, no longer laughing. "We should talk about this," Cayden said. "As a family." Wade almost hung up. Instead, he said, "There's nothing to talk about." "Wade, come on. If this land is worth what they're saying, it's my land," Wade said quietly. "Uncle Tom left it to me. Not to you, not to the family, to me." The silence on the other end was long. "I know," Cayden finally said. I know. But maybe we could work something out. A partnership or... Wade ended the call. He didn't answer when Cayden called back. Didn't respond to the text messages that came after. Didn't acknowledge the family group chat where his mother tried to mediate and Jessica suggested they hire a lawyer to clarify the inheritance. There was nothing to clarify. The deed was clear. The land was Wade's, and everything beneath it, the spring, the minerals, the vault, the history, belonged to him too. He'd spent weeks being mocked for inheriting something worthless. He wasn't going to spend the next months being pressured into sharing something valuable. Instead, he called Dr. Ricardo White and told her to proceed with the excavation. He contacted a conservation group about preserving the historical site. He worked with the county to establish the settlement as an official historical landmark. He hired lawyers to secure the mineral extraction rights and set up a trust that would fund ongoing preservation efforts. By the time his family realized what he was doing, it was already done. The land wasn't worthless anymore, and it wasn't theirs. The family gathering happened on a Saturday afternoon in Cayden's living room. Wade walked in knowing exactly what he was walking into. His mother sat on the sofa, worry creasing her face. His aunt was there, and his uncle. Jessica stood by the window, her arms crossed. And Cayden sat in the leather chair like he owned the room, which he'd always been good at. We need to talk about the property, Cayden said before Wade had even sat down. About what's fair. About what Uncle Tom would have wanted. Wade didn't sit. He stayed standing, his hands in his pockets, and looked at his brother directly. Uncle Tom wanted me to have the land, Wade said. He was specific about that. And I've already made my decisions about what happens with it. You can't just... Jessica started, but Wade cut her off. I can. I did. The mineral rights are being managed through a conservation trust. The historical site is being preserved. The vault's contents are being documented and archived. The spring is being protected. His mother's face softened slightly. That's good, Wade. That's really good. But Cayden just means maybe there's a way to... There isn't, Wade said. You all made your choices. You laughed when I inherited it. You told me it was worthless. You tried to convince me to sell it. And when you found out what was actually here, you wanted to share. Cayden stood up. That's not fair. We're family. Exactly, Wade said. We're family. And family doesn't mock each other for something they don't understand. Family doesn't dismiss you and then try to claim a piece when it turns out you were right. The room went quiet. Wade pulled out his phone and showed them the photographs. The vault, the journals, the maps from 1887, the mineral analysis, the historical documentation. He walked them through the story of Prospect Ridge, of the mining operation, of the deliberate burial that had lasted over 100 years. He showed them what they'd laughed at, what they'd dismissed, what they'd tried to convince him to sell for nothing. And when he was done, he put the phone away and looked at each of them. I'm not angry, he said, and he meant it. I'm not even disappointed. But I'm also not sharing this. Not with you. Not after what happened at Uncle Tom's funeral. His mother reached toward him. Wade. I'm going to preserve the settlement, he continued. I'm going to make sure the story of Prospect Ridge doesn't disappear again. And I'm going to use the mineral revenue to fund that work, and to help the local schools, and to protect the spring. That's what the land is for now. He turned to leave. Cayden called after him. You're really going to cut us out? Wade paused at the door. No, he said. You cut yourselves out when you laughed. I'm just accepting that. He left them standing in that living room, surrounded by the weight of their own choices, and drove back to his land. The vault was still open, still being documented. The spring was still flowing. And the 40 acres that had been worthless just weeks ago now held the kind of value that couldn't be measured in money. It was the value of being right when everyone else was wrong. The value of believing in something nobody else could see. The value of inheriting not just land, but the power to prove them all mistaken.
Wade stood in the pit where the vault had been, watching the afternoon light hit the spring water. Everyone saw trash. He saw home. That's what kept running through his head as he watched Dr. Ricardo White and her team carefully catalog each item from the vault. Not the minerals, not the money, not even the vindication of being right when his family was so spectacularly wrong. Home. The land had never been about proving anything to Cayden or Jessica or anyone else. It was about the fact that when everyone else looked at those 40 acres and saw nothing, Wade had looked at them and seen possibility. He'd looked at rocky soil and isolation and worthlessness, and he'd seen a place where something could grow, where something could matter. The families who'd built Prospect Ridge had felt the same thing. They'd looked at this hillside and seen a mineral spring worth fighting for. They'd built lives here. They'd brought their children here. They'd believed in something that nobody else understood. And then someone had taken it from them, had sealed it, had buried it, had forced them to abandon everything they'd built. For over 100 years, that story had stayed buried. Nobody had wanted the land. Nobody had believed in it. Nobody had been willing to do the work to uncover what was actually there. Until Wade. He wasn't thinking about money when he decided to preserve the vault's contents. He wasn't thinking about revenge when he set up the conservation trust. He was thinking about those families, about the miners who'd worked this land, about the children who'd gone to school in a town that no longer existed. He was thinking about how easy it would have been to sell the land to the first developer who offered money. How easy it would have been to let the vault stay sealed. How easy it would have been to let Prospect Ridge disappear completely. The spring flowed steady and clear, the same water that had been flowing beneath this hillside for centuries. The same water that had made men risk everything. The same water that had been worth burying an entire settlement to protect. Wade knelt beside it and filled a cup with his hand. The water was cold and clean and tasted faintly of minerals. It tasted like history. Like the choices people made when they believed in something.
Like the cost of being right when the world told you that you were wrong.
The visitors started coming in the third week. Students from the university, historians from the state, local people who'd never known a mining settlement had existed on that hillside. Wade showed them the vault, showed them the photographs, showed them the journals and the maps and the letters that told the story of Prospect Ridge. And with each person who walked that land, Wade understood more clearly what his inheritance really was. It wasn't the minerals or the spring or the money. It was the responsibility of keeping something alive that the world had tried to bury. Wade stood in the restored pit, the vault visible behind him, the spring flowing clear and bright. The land that everyone had mocked was now a historical site. The inheritance they'd laughed at was now a responsibility he carried with quiet certainty. But the real question wasn't about minerals or money or vindication. The real question was this: what inheritance are you dismissing as worthless? What are you walking past because everyone else told you it wasn't worth your time? What are you refusing to believe in because it doesn't look like success the way other people measure it? If you've got a story about finding value in what others threw away, subscribe. Because these stories matter. They matter more than the mockery, more than the doubt, more than being right. They matter because they're about the kind of person who looks at nothing and sees home.